Hi everyone, this is Candidate Master Isaac Steincamp with chessopeningsexplained.com, and for today's video, I wanted to start with more of a question for our audience than a statement, and that question is, what do you know about this position? Well, if you're a follower of the chessopeningsexplained.com repertoire, you might be familiar with this position but from reversed colors. Let's take a look. So, e4, c5, knight to f3, and g6. And here we have the hyper-accelerated dragon, and if you play this line, you immediately recognize that the English position that we reached, this one, is a tempo-up version of that. And so with this video series, I'm hoping to discuss why the English opening is a great surprise or primary weapon for you to use in your tournament games if you play the hyper-accelerated dragon. Number one, it's simple, not too much theory, and based on concepts. And number two, you already know what to do against the most common move, 1e5. And that is simply to play g3, knight f6, bishop g2, and treat it like a hyper-accelerated Sicilian. For example, if they play d5, you have a tempo-up version of the main line hyper-accelerated Sicilian. Perhaps you already recognize this position. So let's step back for a second. What else is appealing about the English? Well, if you're a player under 2,000 and you're hoping to break 2,000, this is a great surprise weapon for players rated, in the 1,700 to 2,000 range. A lot of them spend more time studying moves like 1e4, 1d4, and 1 knight f3 simply because they're more popular. But there's nothing that makes the English an inferior opening. In fact, I've played the English opening since I was 1,300 and have since broken 2,100 with it. So I am a huge advocate for the English, and that's why it's here on chessopeningsexplained.com. So with this introduction video, I wanted to showcase a game I played recently at the Pennsylvania State Action Tournament against someone who was about 1,800 rated. So let's have a look. c4, knight f6, knight c3. So what I like about this move is that I can stay relatively flexible. For example, let's say black plays e6. I can choose to play d4, inviting a Queen's Gambit declined, a Nimzo Indian, or a Queen's Indian, or I can play it like a typical English. I could play g3, I could play knight f3, and in some cases I can even play e4. This gives me a lot of flexibility and a lot of ability to prep for particular opponents. The same goes if, let's say, they play c6. I can transpose into a Slav after d4, d5, or I can play it like a typical English position. There's a lot of different ways to handle it here. But let's say if you don't want to play a 1d4 repertoire or you don't want to learn additional theory, well, there's nothing wrong with 2g3. In fact, after e6, bishop g2, d5, you can play a move like b3 here and transpose into a ready, aiming for that double fianchetto setup, or you can play a little bit more aggressively and play into a Catalan. So we get that after this position where white plays d4. And this, of course, is a very popular choice among top-level grandmasters. But okay, you have a lot of flexibility here. I don't want to spend too much time on the nitty-gritty. Let's see what happens. So 2 knight c3, g6, g3. Already, you can see that we're setting up our dream hyper-accelerated Sicilian setup. So even though my opponent chose the symmetrical English, we're still going to use a lot of the same developmental concepts. Castles and castles. And here, again, white has a lot of flexibility. For example, one plan is to play a3, then b4, and even play it like a Benko gambit in some lines. And the main line idea is to just play d4 and open up the center. And one of the things I like about playing d4 is you get a Marozzi bind style of position where you really ask black tough questions, as we'll see in a second. For example, after cd4, knight d4, the main line continues knight d4, queen d4, d6, and already here, white has a lot of ideas. For example, white can play bishop to g5, queen to d3, and e4, simply setting up a bind position, and at some point he'll bring this knight into d5 and has a lot of pressure on this e7 pawn. But my opponent chose queen b6, which doesn't trade as many pieces and doesn't go into this bind structure just yet. Well, if we notice that my opponent is a little bit cramped, what do we want to do? We want to avoid trading pieces, which is why I played this move, knight to b3. And I have a pretty clear plan, which became a little bit more obvious after my opponent played this move, 9 e6, which in my personal notes I gave a question mark. Well, why is this move so bad? So Black's only plan in this position is to play for a move like d5. So our objective with white should be to stop this d5 push at all times. If we stop d5, then black will be stuck with pawns on d7 and e6, meaning that this bishop on c8 will never be able to get into the game. White will basically be playing at least a piece up, maybe two if this rook on a8 also can't get active. So knowing this concept of just simply restricting my opponent, I played c5 immediately. And this is a positional gangbuster kind of move. We take away the d6 square with tempo as we hit the queen, and after queen to d8, I simply made sure that there would be no chances of black being able to play d6 by playing bishop f4 myself, perhaps with the idea of playing bishop d6, and frankly, having a strategically winning position. If you can put a bishop on d6 and restrict your opponent's development, converting the game should be relatively easy. So my opponent, noticing this, had to play this move e5. Well, e5 is not a great move, even though we have to play it. And the reason why is we've just weakened another square in the center. This d5 square. Both my knight on d4 and my bishop on g2 are eyeing this square, perhaps as a potential outpost. And if not, we continue to make it more difficult for black to get this bishop out. All right, so instead of playing back to c1, I decided to play bishop to g5, being more active. And after h6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and knight to e4, we realize that white has solidified his advantage in the center. By getting rid of the knight, black is deprived of a minor piece that can fight for the light squares in the center, and this bishop on f6 is quite passive behind this e5 pawn. So after bishop g7, knight d6, my opponent played a5, with the idea of simply playing a4, trying to kick this knight to undermine this pawn. Well, this plan is going to take some time, and of course, I have more opportunities to stop black's counterplay. One of black's ideas in this position could be to play this move b6. Well, we don't want to let black play b6. We want to stop all the counterplay. So simply knight to c4. Now b6 is not possible. a4, that's okay. Knight bd2. And now I have several ideas for this knight. I can reroute this knight to e4, then c3, then d4, using this weak d5 square. Or, I can keep it here for now, and if I ever play knight d6, bring this knight to c4. This square on d6 is worth a piece. Black played knight to d4. I played knight e4. Black played knight e6. And here, in the spirit of g30, I played a little bit quickly, probably my only inaccuracy of the game, which was queen d6, allowing rook a6. But if I had played queen d5, we'll get a position similar to what we had in the game, where this rook is still on a8, and he didn't get tempo to develop. But okay, queen d6, white still has an advantage. Rook a6, queen d5, knight c7. Even though black is getting another tempo, this knight doesn't really belong on c7, so we don't mind spending the extra move playing queen to d2. Black played knight b5, and here I decided I wanted to make sure I had a firm grip on the c5 pawn with the move b4. The idea simply is, if black decides to take en passant and trade rooks on the a file, well, he just activated my f1 rook, which wasn't really doing that much. I'll play b4, and maybe at some point I can even play this move, rook to a8. This is a dominating position. So black realized this and played rook to e6, which is kind of unaesthetic as it may seem. It might actually be one of the most resilient options for black. I played rook on f to d1. Black played f5, and I simply decided to repeat my hold on the position, knight d6, with the threat of bishop d5. At this point, I think black is already lost. There's no way that this bishop on c8 gets into the game. These two pawns are quite strong. This pawn here on a4 rather, is a permanent weakness. Not to mention, his light squares are really weak. It's going to be really easy to wear down black, and I think that this is close to game over. But black played knight to d4, which after e3, knight c6, bishop d5, we already see that black has a losing position. I'm simply going to win the exchange and be a lot of material up. Well, I usually don't like to showcase games where I win a lot of material, but I thought the ending of this game was at least picturesque. So we'll go through it really quickly. My opponent played queen e7. I decided to play b5. The idea is to force knight b8 because, as what happened in the game, knight d8, I win this bishop for free because the protecting rook has been cut off. So queen takes c5. I decided to bring my knight back. This rook isn't going anywhere, so I'm in no rush to take it. King h7. Well, okay, I might as well take the exchange. Rook a c1. My opponent tried to get out of any potential discoveries, but after knight c8, queen b8, and knight on c4 to b6, we realized that the only square that this queen can go to, well, frankly, nowhere. This queen has no squares. A8, A7, C7, D6 are all taken. So this queen is officially trapped. Black realized this and also realized he had no moves. He plays this move, rook G8. And after queen D7, E4, with the idea of maybe bringing this queen to E5, I played rook to C7. And E5, with the idea of maybe bringing this knight to E6 and deflecting the queen from the rook, I played this move, rook to D6. And now we've reached a position where the only moves that black has that doesn't lose material would be to move his pawns. Well, he only has so many moves, so he actually resigned here. But for example, if black plays a move like a3, I can just play h3. I can wait. Black has no ability to develop, and the moment he moves anything, let's say his king, I can take on g6. Now this bishop is pinned. I'm threatening mate. If the rook moves, he's going to get checkmated. Well, the knight's also trapped, believe it or not. The knight can't go to f7, e6, or c6. And again, the queen is still trapped. His best move might even be to play queen takes c7. That's simply how bad this position is. But this was a fairly strong player. In fact, he was about 1800 rated. And the English seemed to simply be his undoing. After c4, knight to f6, knight c3, we got to a position that seemed standard. And almost immediately, just using concepts of playing in the center, I was able to outplay my opponent. Queen b6 is not that common of a move, so I figure let's focus on this idea. Knight takes d4, queen takes d4, d6. We can play bishop to g5, we can play queen to d3, we can play e4, and white simply has a nice position. For those of you guys who are interested in studying more English games, I would recommend looking at the game Magnus Carlsen versus Eduardo Iturrizaga from the Blitz Championship a few years ago, where a very similar symmetrical English position was reached. So that was my introduction to the English, and I hope I made a strong case for why you should consider playing it at the tournament level, either as a primary weapon or as a secondary weapon or as a surprise weapon. I really think that if you try it, you'll get really good results. It's hard to lose out of the opening, which is a definite plus because there's no worrying about walking into pet lines or tactical lines. You don't really have any of that. You get to avoid all of that with 1c4. So until my next video, try out playing the English in a few of your Blitz games at the club. Maybe you'll already start to see results. Until next time, this is Candidate Master Isaac Steincamp signing off with ChessOpeningsExplained.com.